further ado, thank you again to everybody who is here. My name is Trixie Cordova, and I am the Associate Director here at Diversity Abroad. This webinar is called How to Pay for Study Abroad, and my colleague Deneen and I are excited to walk you through a few of our best tips, strategies, scholarships, and general information about the many ways that you can make study abroad affordable and feasible. We certainly wouldn't want you to think that study abroad is just not an option because it's expensive. We understand that finances can be a huge barrier, but that certainly shouldn't be the reason why you completely dismiss it as an option. So hopefully you have some great takeaway advice from today's webinar. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to getting started. So let's get to it. So this is a little glance at today's agenda. We're going to talk a lot about just setting the framework for study abroad and the affordability of it. And so if you're tuning in and you've maybe never left the country or you've never had to purchase a plane ticket even, it can seem like a very daunting experience. And we don't want that to be the reason that you dismiss a study abroad experience. So we'll cover a little bit about how you can perceive it as affordable, because it can be. We'll talk about how you can potentially use financial aid or any other existing means that you have, as well as some tips for how you can try to seek out more funding opportunities. So whether that's fundraising, whether that's picking up a side hustle, whether that is saving the money that you are earning as a part-time student and work study or something like that. There's a lot of different ways to, again, plan ahead to make this affordable. And then we'll close with a couple of our top tips just to round it out, so that you have some information to take away. So again, my name is Trixie, and as the Associate Director of Diversity Abroad, I oversee our student services. We have a student website, diversityabroad.com. Hopefully everybody who's listening has either visited it or you've walked through it a little bit, or you're even better, you might be a member of our online community. We certainly encourage you to explore all of the resources that we have. We have expert guides on what is study abroad, what are the benefits to my career, what are some things I should consider as a student who identifies in XYZ ways. We also have a whole list of programs and scholarships, alumni stories. And so anything student related in that respect is something that I help to produce and create. Certainly, we're always looking for new ways to engage student audiences. And so we hope that today's webinar, being one example, is something that you all are finding really useful and helpful. Before I pass it on to my colleague Deneen for her to introduce herself, I am just curious if you all could raise your hand if you've heard of Diversity Abroad before. Feel free to raise your hand. Cool. A couple of people. Oh, hey, Ben. What's up? Cool. So it looks like a little, maybe like a handful of you all have heard of us, which is really great. You can go ahead and put your hands down. So for those of you who are brand new to us, thank you for being here. We hope you find today's information session really helpful. And this kind of helps us just to know as well how much information to provide for you all up front. So I'm going to pass it off to Deneen, who is going to introduce herself now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deneen Johnson, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for Diversity Abroad. Some of you may have seen me on your campuses. I oversee our national outreach, which is called the Passport Tour. So that is coordinating, going to study abroad fairs, doing info sessions, classroom visits. So a lot of the outreach on campuses around the nation. I also help with some of the content on diversityabroad.com. So some of the articles that are posted, I assist with social media. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. And mostly a lot of this outreach, whether it's virtually or in person to students. So yeah, hopefully I'll get to meet some of you all in person once I'm on some of your campuses. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Deneen. Great. So now that you have met the two of us, we'll be your co-presenters for the day. And it's nice to know that we have some very brand new faces to our community or names to our community. So thank you to all of you who are tuning in for the first time. Just to give you a little context about what Diversity Abroad is and the kind of programming that we do, so that hopefully you come back and you join us for the next webinar and other information opportunities that we make available either online or on your campus, as Deneen was mentioning. So Diversity Abroad, this is what our homepage looks like if you haven't seen it before, is an organization that was started about 11 years ago now. It was formed by our founder, Andrew Gordon, who studied abroad as an undergrad, as hopefully many of you will have that experience if you haven't already. And as a Black student who studied in Spain, he noticed that there were not a lot of students that kind of identified as he did. So he found himself in the minority in that experience. And I think just from having had that experience, realized that there was a real lack of resources, information, and support specifically for students from diverse backgrounds. And so that is kind of where the organization how it came to be. It's evolved in that 11-year period to include not just student resources. So as we mentioned, we have expert guides, scholarships, we have a whole community forum online where you can connect to other students. We have programming like this as well, but we also have professional resources. So if you are working, if you are tuning in and you're a professional, you may be familiar with our professional resources, but really we want to see that not only are students able to find that support through Diversity Abroad about how they can have identity-based specific information enhance them as they prepare to go overseas, but also what can professionals like advisors and faculty do to better improve how they support the students going on these programs. And so we're really proud of the work that we do. There's a real need for it as more and more students from diverse backgrounds try to pursue global opportunities. So we certainly hope that more students do take advantage of those opportunities, especially while they are in college or at university, because we do find that it's a very transformative, valuable experience, and there's a lot of benefits as to why you should study abroad. So, with that, we like to argue that you can't afford not to study abroad. I know that sounds a little dramatic, but what we mean when we say that is that there's a lot of benefits to having a global experience, and this is not something that is only limited to certain types of people. From certain types of backgrounds in studying specific subjects. We do want students of all identities, of all fields of interest, of all um, institution types to understand that there is a breadth of experiences, programs, and opportunities that are out there. And so if you have in your mind a preconceived notion of who this is for or how long you're supposed to go for, we just want to challenge that. In terms of the benefits of what study abroad can do for you, the first thing we want to talk about is setting yourself apart. I know I've definitely said this to a lot of different students, and this might be an opportunity for some of you to engage with us. If you know the answer, feel free to type it in. But if you were to think, what percentage of U.S. students study abroad every year? What percentage would you guess? So you can go ahead and type some of your guesses in the question box. Again, the question is, what percentage of students in the US do you think study abroad each year? So we have 5%, 15%, 10%, 35%, 1%. Yeah, you guys these are all depressingly low and correct. So the accurate number is 1 of every 10 graduated U.S. college students are studying abroad. So it's certainly a very, very low number. So about 10% of all graduated U.S. college students. Of that 10%, about 30% are students of color. So students that identify as African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Middle Eastern. And so Certainly, those numbers are disappointing overall, given the transformative experience that study abroad can be. And so, when we talk about the benefits of studying abroad and how it sets yourself apart, statistically, I mean, you are a fraction of the student population who is having these kinds of global experiences. And so, really think about that not just in the context of who's having these experiences, but even when it comes to your personal and professional growth. So if you are a student who is studying engineering and you want to go work at Google, or maybe you are a bio major and you want to be pre-med, or maybe you're an art history major and you want to go work in a museum. All of those careers and fields, there are certain benefits and advantages that you give yourself over other applicants for future jobs simply by having an international experience. So there's a lot of great transferable skills that you develop, and certainly we cover those in a lot of different diversity abroad resources. So hopefully that's something that you all can understand in terms of like the cross communication skills that you build, the problem solving skills that you build, and things like that. Uh, when we talk about this is the time, we mean that in a lot of different ways. Can you raise your hand if you are a graduating senior, if you're in your final year of school? Just go ahead and hit that hand icon. I want to make sure my audience is okay. I don't see any hands, so maybe actually one. Okay, one or two or three. Okay, so when we say this is the time, that's you guys can go ahead and put your hands down. We really mean that in a few different ways. Number one, in terms of affordability, as a college student, you have the most access to scholarships and funding resources than you would if you were to study abroad as a graduate student, potentially, even if you wanted to pursue fellowships or graduate school abroad. It's not to say that there are those opportunities for financing don't exist, but certainly the breadth of scholarships for international experiences are available as an undergraduate. And so at Diversity Abroad, for example, the majority of our scholarships are for students that are enrolled in undergrad. The financial aid that you currently have, a lot of that can be used towards study abroad. This is something that the rule for this will vary by institution. So I would certainly make the time, if you haven't before, to speak with your financial aid office to see how much of your existing financial aid funding can be applied towards an international program. At some schools, every single dollar that you get to be a student, you can apply to study in another country. So that alone, I think we mentioned that so as to challenge the perception of affordability, right? If you are a current college student and you kind of get the sticker shock from studying abroad, you probably also had a sticker shock when you were looking at how much it costs to be a college student sometimes. And so really just think about this being the time to study abroad because of all those financial resources. Another reason we say this is the time to study abroad is because in terms of health and safety, there's a lot of crazy things that happen in the world. And I know students and their families admittedly are concerned about where you can be, where you will be, how you can be safe. And I will say that as a study abroad participant, when you're going through an established program, through an established institution, coordinated through your home institution, there are so many checks and balances and professionals that make it their job to make sure that you are taken care of and that you're safe from before you even think you're interested in going to preparing as you go abroad, once you're in country, and even when you get back. So if you think you'll have to convince family members and parents specifically to have to have them on board for your decision to go abroad, really emphasize that we're not this isn't really sending you on a plane by yourself and having you figure it out on your own. There are all kinds of systems in place to kind of help you navigate that process. And the third thing I'll say with this is the time specifically is, it's really hard once you've graduated, when you're a working professional, to have the kind of time and finances that you can commit to doing a study abroad program. In the sense that having a full 4 weeks of time to travel and go to another country, let alone to get academic credit for it or to have professional experiences, is really, really rare. And so I highly encourage you to consider all of those factors as to why you should try and pursue a global experience while you're still in school. Um, in terms of exploring the international aspects of your major, I know I mentioned earlier a few examples as to how international, how you can internationalize every major or every field of study. So I certainly don't want you to, and I've heard students say, "Well, I'm a bio major. This is irrelevant," or I'm not really interested in studying abroad. It has nothing to do with my future job." And so I just challenge you to rethink that if you find yourself in that mentality. Again, you're setting yourself apart by being one of 10 students in the country who have these kinds of experiences. And so think about the kind of leverage that gives you when you're looking for what's next after college. So it certainly helps you launch your career as well. Again, the advantages that gives you, the people you might meet, the industries you'll develop more inside knowledge about can really give you a heads up. And then, of course, becoming a global citizen, right? So much of what you develop when you go abroad are the kinds of hard and soft skills that you might not necessarily develop or further develop if you stayed at school, at home the entire time. So certainly even just the process of navigating yourself from the airport in another country to get home, communicating in a city or a country where the majority language is not your own. Though all of those things transform you and they change you. And so there's so many benefits, and these are just a few that we'd like to highlight when it comes to why this is an opportunity you should try to pursue. So with that, now we've sort of established a baseline of why you should hopefully do it, and hopefully finances are not the reason you choose not to do it. Let's talk about expenses, right? Um, So we're going to walk you through some of the many ways that the cost of study abroad can be broken down into. Um, this is going to vary on the program that you're interested in. So regardless of all of the information that we share with you today, we also encourage you to make an appointment with a study abroad advisor if you have one at your school. If you don't, an academic advisor is equally as helpful and can help you find the kinds of resources to make the right decision for you about studying abroad. So the cost of the program might be separate in itself. You'll have to think of buying your flights, and if you don't have a visa, getting one. If you need if you don't have a passport, getting one. If you need a visa on top of that, thinking about the tuition, housing. If you're doing something like a homestay, that's usually at no cost versus staying in a dorm where there are going to be associated costs. Are there meal plans associated with a study abroad program? How about books and other school materials? Can you use your phone and your laptop, and what kind of internet connections would you need? So there's certainly a lot of information, or sorry, a lot of potential expenditures, and just like you would have at your home institution here in the US, some of those are covered by financial aid and scholarships, right? So certainly, if you broke this down line by line, it might seem a little daunting, but there are, again, a lot of different ways that you can cover these costs, and we're going to go over a couple of those in a little bit. Excuse me. So since all of those different items might vary depending on your program, do the research that is necessary to make sure you understand to the dollar what is going to be the cost of this program. I've certainly had students ask me, like, well, generally, like, how much would you say it would cost? And that's a really hard question to answer. Some programs might cost a couple of $1,000s through your school. If you went through another bigger program, it might be in the tens of thousands. And that really, really varies. And so it's hard to say there's any one given price, but research. Think about how those costs, if costs is the biggest factor to you, think about potentially choosing a program where the cost of living is low, where maybe it's not as far from home. So if you're on the East Coast, going to somewhere to Europe might be cheaper than going somewhere in Asia. And if you're on the West Coast in the United States, maybe going to Central America is a lot more affordable, right? So those might be some factors. How much is it to get around? How much is it to purchase food? And think about also, you want to not just have the money for the necessities, you want to have the money to be able to explore, to enjoy your time while you're there, right? Think about the excursions, souvenirs that you want to buy, having an emergency fund just in case, especially if you're going for a semester or a year long term. If you're not going to be working and you know that you're not having any income coming in, making sure that you have enough to be able to survive and feel comfortable with the funds that you do have. We do have a whole handouts section, so I do want to point out this entire presentation is a huge thanks to our sponsors, FiE, the Foundation for International Education, and we do have a handout that they've provided. So this is kind of a tool that you can use. So go ahead and click on where it says Study Abroad Sample Budget Worksheet, and that's a great resource for you if you're curious about how to kind of like break this down. Deneen is going to talk a little bit later about budgeting and how you can start to do that now and even when you get abroad. But this is one example of a spreadsheet that FiE offers. And maybe your school has one, maybe the program you decide to go on has one as well. And then we at Diversity Abroad also have some resources. So again, do your research to find out what those costs are and do a little breakdown, right? If this was an equation, it would kind of think of it as the money you have in financial aid that you're already offered, plus hopefully scholarships you get, minus the cost of that program and how much of that money is kind of left over. So it definitely is not something, this is part of also why we encourage you to try to plan ahead as much as possible, so that you make sure that if you need to start saving up sooner rather than later, you know, it's now October. If you wanted to study abroad by next spring, that's January. It's coming up quick, right? Is that enough time for you to save the money that you're earning now and to score some of the scholarships that you need? Versus if you wanted to study maybe next summer or next fall, you have a lot more time to start doing some planning and some saving, and to start applying for more competitive scholarships. So let's talk a little bit about using financial aid to study abroad. As I mentioned earlier, every school has a different policy, so there isn't one rule for how you can use your financial aid package to study abroad, but we certainly want to give you a couple more tips about how to just keep in mind the financial aid package that you have, whatever other funding resources you have, and how you can start to plan to ensure that you go overseas not just with enough to get by, but enough to kind of enjoy your time there. So one thing I ask for you all to think about is where are the current funds that you are using for school, for meals, for everything in between? Where is that coming from? Is that coming from your financial aid package, from that refund check that you get? I know I was excited about getting all the time. Are you working on top of that? Is it work study? Do you have family that are kicking you some funds to help you get by day to day? Where is that money coming from? And knowing if that is a resource that you can tap into while you're abroad, can really help you think about, you know, are you going to be able to live with the same level of income and support that you had at home when you go overseas? Uh, as we mentioned, speak to your study abroad advisors and the financial aid office. They work with one another if you're planning to study abroad, so that they can make sure that the funds you have can be used. And if there are funds that cannot be transferred, they can try to make references for what other scholarships or funds you can tap into. I mean, the financial aid office will even give you options for applying for additional loans. That's certainly sort of like a last resort for us, that we like to say, because there's so many other grants and scholarships, and other fun ways to fundraise and get money. But again, tap into both your study abroad advising and financial aid advising staff, so that you can understand exactly what your financial situation is and the kinds of resources that are available to you. Be open to cost-effective study abroad options. So I mentioned this earlier, but maybe you want to choose a location that is closer to home because that means the flight will be cheaper. Or maybe you want to choose a country where the cost of living is so low that even though you know that you budget, I don't know, $20 a day for food, that $20 can actually stretch to 4 or 5 days in another country. Which I personally did an internship when I was in Cambodia, and $5 could easily cover 2 to 3 meals. And so I know that can be hard to kind of grasp, but there are certainly countries around the world where the cost of living is that much lower than it is in the US. So that refund check you get can go a lot further than you might think it could. Um, and not only that, but going to what we call a non-traditional location oftentimes potentially can increase your chance for more competitive scholarships. So diversity abroad has hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships. And one of the things that I know we try to do is not just diversify who gets our scholarships, what institutions they represent, or how they identify themselves or what they're studying, but also we want to see diversity in location, right? Um, all students have dreams of studying abroad in some of the most popular European destinations. But if you're open to doing maybe Morocco or Kenya, Chile, or Thailand, these are places that students don't traditionally go to. And so you really make yourself stand out as an applicant, specifically for some of those more competitive scholarships. So if your number one factor impacting your decision to study abroad is cost, maybe be open to the location and just say, okay, where are the lowest cost of living locations, or where are the cities that offer the most scholarships and funding? And that might be a great alternative to deciding where you decide to go. Um, Exchange programs are kind of what they sound like, but just to give you some additional information, an exchange program is essentially where you would pay what you always pay as a student at your school, and a student in another school in another country will pay what they always pay to be a student at their school. And then, of course, you switch places. So, exchanges can be a great cost effective way of going abroad because you're not paying any more than you would already pay when you're a student. Obviously, you would pay to get over there and to cover your flights, but there are a lot of scholarships out there, and a lot of other funding means to cover the costs of a flight. This is not something that every school offers. So again, check with your study abroad office to see, maybe there are certain schools that they have exchange partnerships with. So let's say a school has a partnership with this one specific school in China, this one specific school in Australia, and this one specific school in the Dominican Republic. But you're like, I wanted to go to Japan. Well, if your biggest cost, if your biggest concern is cost, then and you have exchange programs, then maybe you have to be open to considering one of those other schools. Okay. So there's just a couple of tips in mind. In terms of questions you should ask your advisor, again, what kind of financial aid do you currently receive? Understanding the difference between scholarships, grants, loans, and it's not written here, but I would also ask them what kind of funds are federal versus state versus institutional. In that sense, it helps to know, maybe there are some scholarships that you think you can use anywhere, but they might be specific to only classes you're taking at your school. So just ask your advisor what kind of funding you get and how much of that you can take abroad. And then, of course, the big question of what kind of study abroad scholarships are available. So there's a ton. We have a bunch on our website, and we're going to talk about those now just so you have a glimpse of what kind of scholarships exist out there. So scholarships are obviously a great way to pay for study abroad. This list that we have on the slide is also on that second handout. So if you click under handouts where it says Diversity Abroad Scholarship Flyer, you can go ahead and download the PDF version of this information. We have scholarships with specific countries, with specific providers. This is just a sample of some of the scholarships on our website. So if you go to diversityabroad.com/scholarships, you will see some that are open right now for the spring 2018 cycle, but you can also hit search just to see all of the other scholarships. So this list right now that you're looking at is by no means comprehensive. There's a ton more out there, and again, we don't want that to be the reason that you don't ultimately study abroad. I will point out that the three with our logo on them, the Overseas Ambassadors Program, the Planning Scholarship, and the Network Summer Scholarship, are all funds that you can use towards any study abroad program. So if you are at a community college, for example, and you want to go through your school, you could be eligible. You could still apply for the Overseas Ambassador Scholarship because that you can use for anywhere at any time. The other two, you have to be a student at a network member school. And if we have time at the end of the presentation, I'll come back to what that is and what those schools are. So this is just, again, a quick glance at our scholarships that we offer. And then I do want to point out that our sponsors, FiE, we have a scholarship with them as well. FiE programs are largely in London and Ireland. So if those are two countries, or not London, England and Ireland, excuse me. So if those are two countries that you're interested in studying abroad, they have a great list of opportunities and programs. We have two scholarships available for next spring with FiE. They're $3,000, and that application is due 10 days from today. So it's due on October 15th. So if you are interested in studying abroad with FiE, we certainly encourage you to consider submitting an application. And again, you can see that application on our website, diversityabroad.com/scholarships. In terms of other scholarships, again, this is not an exhaustive list. Some of these are on our website, but this is just to kind of let you see where all of these other opportunities for funding can come from. Has anyone here, and maybe I won't ask this question, so you don't have to raise your hand, but if you are aware of your financial aid package, you may know that you get a Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is a federal grant given to students that exhibit high financial need. And if you are a Pell Grant recipient, you are eligible for this first scholarship called the Gilman Scholarship. It's given to students sometimes like $5,000 for the summer. So there's a lot of funding out there. You can apply that to any study abroad program as long as it's at least 4 weeks long. So certainly look into that if you think that you might qualify. A lot of these other ones, I won't go in them in too much depth, but those first, well, 1, 2, and 4 are all funded by the State Department. The Critical Language Scholarship is a fully funded summer program for students interested in learning what is called a critical language. Hopefully you all are familiar with what critical languages are, but there's a whole list on the website that you can explore. And a couple of these are just other ways and places you can find funding. So definitely keep that in mind. The deadline is closed for the Gilman. Thank you, Lisette, for that update. So again, if you are hoping to study abroad, think about how quickly some of the deadlines come up. It certainly doesn't mean that you can't still get this scholarship in the future, but give yourself a lot of leeway for finding those opportunities ahead of time. Good point. Thank you for bringing that up. And before I pass it off to Deneen, a few scholarship application tips. I know I've certainly met a lot of really great students who have been able to make study abroad completely free to them by getting competitive scholarships, by using their financial aid, and by planning ahead of time. That certainly is it's certainly possible, but of course, with the scholarships, we want you to put in the work necessary to make sure that you are writing a competitive application. I have read thousands of scholarship applications, and I can tell in the first 30 seconds if that scholarship application was either written the day it was due or if there was very little effort put into that essay. And so we please ask you, if you really want to be considered for some of these more competitive applications, to do the homework, to know when they're due, to work with professionals or mentors or people that you trust to help you craft your essays and your personal statements to make those really, really strong. I will shout out that we have a webinar on scholarship writing tips, so we'll definitely encourage you to check that out. And if you need a letter of recommendation, that's where building professional relationships with professors, with people that you're working with, come in really handy. So be cognizant of the work that is required to be a scholarship recipient, and give yourself the time to really put in the effort, to make sure that you are maximizing the possibility of you getting those funds. So with that, I am going to pass it off to Deneen, who's going to talk you through some other funding tips as well as budgeting, for study abroad.
Great. Thank you, Trixie, for that introduction. So we're going to talk a little bit about, again, what Trixie mentioned, other ways to pay for your study abroad experience. So we know that scholarships is one of the most popular ways to pay, your financial aid as well. But there's also additional, options and opportunities for you to pursue if maybe you have still a little bit of deficit, like you won the scholarship that you're looking for, but you still needed a little bit more money for spending money, or maybe you need additional funds to cover the fact that you'll be missing work maybe from studying abroad. So just thinking about additional ways to increase your funds to accommodate your study abroad experience. So we'll go ahead and get started and talk about first, crowdfunding. So for example, GoFundMe or Fund My Travel. I'm sure you've heard of GoFundMe, and it is the opportunity for you to fundraise online, which has become really popular for a lot of students who are pursuing study abroad opportunities. So consider a GoFundMe account, and also make it a point to share your goals for your study abroad experience. So you know what your goals are, and they're academic related, they're career related. You're not just going there for a vacation. It's very intentional travel for your education. Make sure you express those goals in your GoFundMe page. Also, it'd be interesting to set up donation levels. So in your bio section, maybe say, if you donate X amount of money, I'll bring you back a keychain. But if you donate even more, maybe it's a keychain and a postcard and another little trinket or something else. So setting up donation levels for people to contribute also helps frame how much that you're in need of. And kind of make it kind of like a game for others to know that they're contributing and investing into your educational experience. So I'll show you an example of a GoFundMe account of a student who was studying abroad. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, it says like the bronze level. So this student, again, did set up goals for individuals to donate to. Got a lot of shares on Facebook, social media, and I believe the student did achieve their goal. So consider a GoFundMe account, and raise your hand if you've heard of GoFundMe and or have used it. Okay, so we got some hands raised. Great. So do try that, consider it. And then it's easy to be able to share this link with others. So you can either pass it along to your parents or guardians, and they can share it potentially with coworkers. You can send it to relatives far away or near to you. You can send it to individuals of community organizations that you're a part of. So do consider a GoFundMe account. And again, express what you're specifically needing the funds for. Maybe you just need the money for your flight and not necessarily your entire program. So express your goals, express your expectations, and create some reward levels for others to contribute and invest into your future. So again, we talked about sharing, and consider this. There may be individuals who have wanted to travel. They're almost living vicariously through you. So maybe it's grandparents or someone who's a little bit older who does want to donate for your experience. Or somebody who maybe looks up to you and they're just excited to see you go and pursue that study abroad experience. So again, make it such that individuals know that they're really benefiting they're really benefiting by contributing to your experience. And again, keep in mind to always say thank you, whether it's for a scholarship that you receive or any kind of funds that may come your way. Always give thanks. So let's talk about additional funding sources for you. Of course, it seems kind of obvious to maybe get a job, but consider with the holiday season coming up, there's a lot of, I know, seasonal positions opening up soon. Actually, I've seen some advertisements for job fairs for a few of the different department stores, even in my area. So consider during the holidays, maybe picking up a seasonal job or a few extra hours, or just to see what is available for you within your community and on campus. There may be holiday events that you can work as an event staff. So just think about some other ways that you can take advantage of opportunities to pursue maybe a temporary part-time position. Or maybe you're really good at selling your unused clothes or furniture or other items that you don't necessarily need. I know that some do have to move out of your dorms during the holiday break. And there's easy ways to sell some of your clothing with shops that are nearby. I believe also Facebook, and there's a couple other apps that make it really, easy to sell some clothing through consignment. And then consider about the skills that you have. Excuse me. So I know myself, I have played the bass guitar for over a decade. So for example, I could give bass guitar lessons to students in my area. So utilize the skill that you have, and how can that be a way that you do make money? Or as college students, go out and tutor maybe somebody who's in K through 12 or elementary school. So utilize your skills and your talents that you have, market it in such a way that it's a benefit to others, and then see how you're able to, profit or make some money off the skills that you do have. And again, we talked about GoFundMe. And again, with GoFundMe, maybe the online page works for you, maybe it doesn't for others. I know when I was raising money for a trip abroad, I also hand wrote letters and sent them out to family members, and that was just as impactful. So that's what we say called going old school, but it still is beneficial to send a letter in the mail and ask for support from family and friends. And then the last one is unsubscribe from subscriptions. I actually spoke to a student, I want to say a couple of weeks ago, who mentioned, I had to unsubscribe from, clothing stores or food locations that would send discounts, because then there was that impulse buying. So consider reducing your expenses, or even reducing the temptation to spend, and you'll find that you're able to save some money that way. And again, to reiterate, we want to go back to talking about scholarships even within the community, but it's always a good reminder for another funding source. So saving for study abroad. So 3 ways to think about saving. And again, this could be for you to, again, reduce your funds and know that you have money that's set aside for you for your trip. It's also a good way to know that you're avoiding unnecessary waste or expenses that you don't need to really be expending, because remember, your goal is to go abroad. If you save now, you can enjoy later. And another way to think about saving is to spend less money, just in general. So the less money you spend, the more money you have. So those are just some basic foundational thoughts about saving. And you can write in the chat box some unique ways that you choose to save. So for example, I talked to a student who makes mason jars and puts different countries on the mason jars, and then they put their money in the mason jars if they see extra change that they have in their purses or wallets or backpacks. So that's one way, a unique way that they choose to save. So if you want to share some of your saving tips, go ahead and add those in the chat box now, and we can share those within the next couple of slides. And the reason why saving is important, a couple reasons, and ensure that you have the money to spend while you are abroad, and the money to spend on things that are important to you. For example, excursions, or again, the basic things like food. You also have maybe an emergency account just so something comes up. But also keep in mind, saving now establishes a healthy spending habit, which is beneficial now just as much as it is once you're actually abroad. So one thing we don't want you to do is to be like author And he's always going out with friends and spending money on dinner and items that he doesn't necessarily need to. That sounds very familiar to me. So when I'm thinking about ways to save, you're just reducing the temptation of going out and thinking about the fact that, hey, if I reduce my expenses now, if I save, I'll really enjoy this opportunity of going abroad. And another way to think about it is you have developed your goals for going abroad. You know exactly what your motivation is, what you'll benefit from. Use that as your motivation to say, hey, I am going to save the money. You can also find an accountability person, that really good friend who will not even tempt you with say, hey, let's go out to eat, because they know that your goals are to save for your study abroad expense in the future. So did anybody share how they are wanting to, how they save money? Okay. So someone said, Lizette said couponing. Someone else said also applying for food stamps. So if you do qualify for food stamps, someone else was like walking instead of paying for, I believe it's like paying for public transportation. Absolutely. Great. Thank you all for sharing. And we already talked about what are some of your favorite saving tips, but I'll share a few of mine and Trixie's. I love to automate my savings because as much as I enjoy having the money that's saved up, it's really difficult for me to remember to transfer money into my savings account. So I actually have apps on my phone that just do it for me. So here's a couple of examples of a couple of apps that are used, Digit and Capital. I do know that unfortunately Digit now charges for the app, but there's also a few different apps that you can use that don't charge. So figure out which one works for you. That's one way to automate your savings. Another way is being self-reliant, so eating out less. And again, the suggestion of walking instead of public transportation. There are just a plethora of ways that you can be more reliant on yourself other than some of the conveniences that cost you a bit more money. So the third thing is to create an actual savings account. So if you don't have a savings account, maybe you want to create a specific one and a separate one just for study abroad. Consider that, and then I know that some of the campuses have banks right there on your campus. Maybe that's promotions for you. It's really convenient for you to save. So consider opening up a savings account and see if they have any promotions for you because you're a student. So out of sight, out of mind, remember that account is just for your study abroad or intern abroad, volunteer abroad experience. But it's easy that it's there and that it's kind of put away. And also partner with an accountability buddy, which I mentioned a bit earlier, just someone else who maybe shares the same goal that you have. Maybe you're both going abroad. I know I only studied abroad because I had a friend who was going to Italy with me. And so we were able to kind of encourage each other to maybe cook at home instead of eat out, or do a few things to save money so that we both can enjoy our time in Italy. So consider, again, somebody to help keep you accountable, and that's really supportive of you going abroad. So spending wisely while you're abroad. Again, we talked about that budgeting sheet a little bit earlier, but again, a budget is a plan for your expenses, but it's also the amount of money that is available for you. So I know we think about the word finances and budgeting and savings, and sometimes we cringe a little bit because it sounds really, really overwhelming. But understanding how much money is available is also going to help you enjoy your experience, because again, you won't spend so much money towards the beginning. You'll know how to balance out your money while you're there abroad. So again, some of the benefits of budgeting, it helps you with your spending pattern. You'll make better decisions. Just think about, while you're abroad, you do have opportunities to go on excursions. So maybe you can't go on all the excursions if you haven't saved up for that, but maybe you can go on a few of them. And it ensures that you'll always have funds available. So you won't be guessing like, I don't know how much money I have, or looking at your bank account before you swipe your card. You already know how much you have because you created that budget and it's available for you. And again, it helps to help you develop a habit for your spending. So keep that in mind. You can also use apps for budgeting as well. I know I use an app every time I swipe my card. It tells me how much I'm spending at the grocery store, how much I'm spending on gas or public transportation or entertainment. So that also might be a helpful way for you to budget while you're here to make sure that you're saving, but also while you're abroad. So some of our next steps are our top 5 tips. So we talked today a lot about obviously how to pay for your study abroad experience. So we talked about using your financial aid package, talking to your advisor, having a conversation with them to see how much money you currently already have and the differences between a scholarship, a grant, and a loan. We want you again to apply to scholarships such as the one that's offered by our sponsor today, FiE. But we also know you can get scholarships, which is fantastic, but what's your backup plan just in case you don't get the scholarships, but you still want to study abroad? So consider things like fundraising with the GoFundMe or the travel fund, but it's also really, really important for you to save as well. So saving and budgeting are also really important. And once you've done all that hard work of talking to your advisors, you put all the down payment money, you paid for your experience, now you're on the plane and you're abroad, we want to make sure that while you're in country, that you stick to the budget that you've created so you can enjoy your experience while you're there. So at this point in time, does anybody have any questions about the presentation today, additional tips on that they want to share with each other on how to pay and or save for their study abroad experience? Trixie and I can go ahead and take your questions now. It looks like Jordan said that they set up a checking account to automatically transfer money to savings. Helpful advice.
Yeah, and Lisette said another saving tip was following Crazy Coupon Lady. I don't know who that is, but Crazy and Coupon with a K. I know there's a couple of apps out there too that are coupons based. So when you're checking out for groceries and things like that, you can always pull up a couple of coupons. I don't know any off the top of my head, but I've certainly seen people use those apps to help just cut corners. Lisette said it's an app. Good to know. Okay. What somebody else said, what are the deadlines for the diversity abroad scholarships? Can you apply to do more than one diversity abroad scholarship? That's a good question. All of our scholarships, their deadlines are kind of staggered throughout the fall. So currently we are only accepting applications for students planning to study abroad in spring 2018. The Diversity Abroad and FiE Scholarship that we've mentioned is due October 15th. So that is coming up in 10 days. So if students are planning to study abroad on an FiE program, they are certainly eligible to apply for that scholarship. We have other scholarships as well. So I'm going to type into the chat box the link for where you can find all of our other scholarships that we offer, which is just going to diversityabroad.com/scholarships. The handout also has scholarships, but the deadlines are not there because this is something that we produce every year, and scholarships cycle every semester, essentially. So yeah, the latest scholarships that we have open close around early November. So certainly throughout the next month and a half, there are still other scholarships open and available for students. So the other one that I would say is applicable to any student at any program is our Overseas Ambassador Scholarship, and that one is due November 1st. Otherwise, we encourage you to click on the link that I just sent, and any scholarships that are currently open, you'll see listed, and then you can click on each individual one you might be interested in to see when those applications are due. So thank you for that question, Constance. Hopefully that answered your question. Jordan asks, how early can I apply for scholarships? That's a good question. I would say give yourself at minimum, so you don't feel rushed, anywhere from like at minimum 4 to 6 months in advance. Right now it's October. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is a good time to start thinking and planning for scholarships for next fall or next summer. There are certainly still programs and scholarships available for the spring. So we certainly have some that are still open for the spring, but it might feel rushed. So when you're thinking about planning and saving and fundraising, if you have the luxury of time to plan ahead, definitely take advantage of that. Not only does that mean you can continue to search for the most scholarships that are out there that you're eligible for, but it also gives you the time to kind of like plan and write a really strong scholarship application. Isaacs asks, when should I start applying for scholarships if I'm studying abroad in the fall? I think, honestly, starting to look now never hurts. And I say that because typically a lot of scholarships, for example, the Gilman, which we mentioned was for Pell Grant recipients, they offer that every semester or every year. So understanding what the application looks like is something you can find out now. So if why not, for example, give yourself the advantage and ask your school, hey, has anyone at this school ever got a Gilman scholarship? Do you think I can talk to them? Can they connect me to somebody that can help them write their application materials? Giving yourself again this time frame to start doing some early research and writing, I think really, really helps. And so giving yourself the heads up is really good. I will say diversity abroad specific scholarships for the fall don't open until the end of January at the earliest. So our scholarships are about one semester ahead of the term that you plan to go abroad. And hopefully that answers your question. Um, Deneen, obviously, feel free to chime in. I know there's a lot of questions that are coming in, but I certainly don't have all the answers either. So feel free to answer if you have anything to chime in about.
Sure.
Yeah.
Morgan mentioned Retail Me Not as an app for like coupons. It's another way to reduce expenses. And then there was a question for, do you offer scholarships that graduate students are eligible for? I know that we partner with a lot of organizations that do offer scholarships for graduate students. For example, if you're interested in studying in Germany, DAAD is an organization that offers scholarships for graduate students. I know when I was a graduate student looking for scholarships, I even looked on campus because for whatever reason, graduate students didn't apply for a lot of the campus-wide scholarships. Therefore, I became a unique student in the application pool. So consider even looking at your institution and seeing, I'm a graduate student wanting to study abroad, see how what expenses or what scholarships are available for you there. Trixie, do you have anything to add to that?
For grad school?
Mm-hmm.
I know, like for me, I did a lot of research at the institution I was going to see what kind of scholarships they have. Depending on the program you're going on to, the school that you're going through, there's general graduate school. There might be departmental things. So there's a question about scholarships for graduate school, but then there's a specific question about scholarships to study abroad while you're in graduate school. For me, when I did my internship in Cambodia, I looked for departmental funds. And so there was one grant that was available to students. You had to indicate what your internship was going to be, and similar to a scholarship application, submit those materials for the chance of getting some funding. And so I was fortunate to get that. And so that's one thing I would encourage you to look into is just departmental funds. Kaisha also asked, or do you know of any resources for scholarships that graduate students can use to find scholarships? Well, we mentioned earlier the Boren Scholarship. So the Boren is simultaneously a scholarship and a fellowship. It's the same award, but they call it one versus the other for undergrad versus grad school. So if you are a graduate student, it's called a fellowship. If you are an undergrad, it's called a scholarship. So I would look up the Boren. The Boren does stipulate that you work for the federal government for at least a year after you earn that award. So that's sort of like the trade-off.
but certainly they have more information about what that looks like. But I would look at that to start. We have some graduate school materials on our website as well. So I'm going to try to pull that up and put it into the chat box before we wrap up, which I know we're over time officially by a little bit. But I do want to make sure that you get that. No problem, Kaisha. Hope I'm saying your name right. So yeah, I think in the interest of time, we might wrap up. Janine is put up sort of like the different ways you can connect to us. We are all over the place, as you can see. Our webinar videos that we mentioned are on our Vimeo page, which is that last symbol. So if you type in vimeo.com/diversityabroad, you'll see some of our other previous webinar materials up there. But of course, we post on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We try to give you reminders of application deadlines, so make sure you follow us. And if you haven't yet, definitely try to join our community. It's free, and so we certainly encourage you to look into joining our community so you can fully have access to all of our resources. We would love to see you there to contribute back to other people that are interested in potentially studying abroad. Before we go to, you can see there's my email address as well as Denine's. Kaisha, I'm going to submit in the chat box another link for some of our study and research fellowships at the graduate level. So that's in the chat box. So you and anyone else who's listening can go ahead and check that out. But yeah, feel free to email us otherwise if you have questions that we weren't able to answer. But on behalf of Deneen, thank you so much for joining us, and huge thank you again to our webinar sponsors, the Foundation for International Education. We hope to hear from you soon, and thank you for joining us.